Welcome to the recording for the composition unit. The composition unit, as you can see, is part of week 3 work. And again, starting with week 3 and including week 3, 4, and 5, you're going to have 2 units that you need to do. Now, I've recorded this information is in a previous recording that's already posted. Now, this recording is just going to explain the composition unit. There is no write-up for the composition unit. The write-up for week 3 only covers the subject unit. So as you get over here to, like, there's the subject unit with the recording and the write-up, and then the composition unit, you're only going to have a recording in it. So that's what you're watching now to help you with the composition unit. So let's jump into this. And composition of photographs is really important. So like this talks about here, whether it's a paper for school or a letter or a post you're going to put on a website or something like that. It's up to you to determine what you want in it and how it all fits together. Well, same thing in photographs. The elements you include in the images can be choppy with little relationship between them, or they can be smooth, showing the relationships, making a complete image. So that's what we want to do, is we want to make sure that as we think about the pictures we take, not only the subject, but also the composition around the subject and how we make the photograph look dynamic. Because we want people to enjoy our pictures. That's the whole goal of taking photographs. So as we look at this, we're talking about composition. So composition is how you arrange the subject and other elements. So if you look at this composition, the person's in the foreground and there's stuff in the background that is something related to that person. So essentially the composition is what you include in the frame as well as what your main subject is. And sometimes the composition can be more important than what your subject is. So good composition gives the person looking at the photograph something to do. It helps guides their eyes around the picture so they see the whole picture, not just the main subject, but they kind of have an experience looking at your pictures. So you're going to look at what's called the rule of thirds. You look at how to use leading lines of an image for composition and explain what viewpoint and perspective are. So the rule of thirds. As you can see on this picture, the rule of thirds is a basic guide to composing photographs. And it came in from early photographers. Almost all of them were painters before they turned to photography, and the only way they could, and it was natural that they would use composition within their pictures. So what the rule of thirds does is it offsets the subject in the image so it will appear more dynamic than putting the subject in the center. So you can see this picture. This could have been shifted over a little bit, and maybe this would have been the subject right here, but it kind of moved it over a little, and it probably makes the image more interesting to look at. And also almost gives the picture some motion. So there's really no motion in the picture, but it makes your eyes start doing a little bit of work, and it can make pictures more interesting. Now the way you do this is to use the rule of thirds. You divide your viewfinder into a tic-tac-toe board, or when you take your picture, you kind of think about a tic-tac-toe board and place your subject on one of the lines. You can do this with the viewfinder, either landscape or portrait, and use the vertical or horizontal lines, and I'll show you that in a second. It's like if you're taking a picture of your friend, use the portrait orientation, and your friend's eyes would be roughly near the top of the picture, so your friend wouldn't be right in the center of the picture. If you take a picture of your friend at a park leaning against the tree, of course you're going to use landscape orientation, and you place your friend maybe along the line, the tic-tac-toe line on the left. So then you can see some of the park stuff in the background. Now I have a sample here I'll show you. So if we take a look at this, like this picture was taken me, that's the Oregon Ocean in the background, but you can see that was shot right in the center. I was the main focus of the picture. But if I had been offset over here a little bit, it would have gotten more of the idea, the context of the picture in the background. So this one was not taken very well. This one, you can see that my son and I were at a football field. This is at Boise, and by having us offset a little bit, then you can see that we could see that it was a football field because there's a scoreboard there. We even see that Boise has a track around their field, and we see Boise's famous blue football field. So you can see the difference in the way pictures are taken. So think about the offset of pictures. This one, my eyes could have even been down here on this bottom line, and it would have given more of this, the shoreline and the ocean in the background. So those are just a couple of ideas on how to use this. So think about a tic-tac-toe board, because when you turn in your work in this unit, if you don't have things like offset, then I'm going to turn it back and say, no, you need to do the rule of thirds and use the rule of thirds. So that talks about the rule of thirds and how you can sort of have an imaginary tic-tac-toe game within your viewfinder. Now, when you're working with larger subjects, sometimes it can be too hard to align with tic-tac-toe. So when taking pictures of cards, when taking a picture of the car that includes your friend, put her roughly on one of the lines and let the car fill up the rest of the frame. When you're photographing just the car, put some important feature along the line, some important feature of the car. If you're photographing a building, put some prominent feature roughly on the line and let the rest of the building fill in the frame. So here's a self-check activity talking about rule of thirds. So lining things up. So now we're going to talk about lines in pictures. So using lines is another basic photographic basic of photograph composition. Lines can lead the eyes around the picture. So it's kind of neat. I look at this and I see this line right here, and it kind of leads my eyes to the picture, but I also see the shadow line and I see the sidewalk line. So this picture is kind of dynamic. This is much more interesting than if we were just standing directly in front and taking a picture, right? Taking at this angle with these lines is pretty nice. Now, the different lines are vertical, horizontal, diagonal. So vertical, of course, is up and down. It's like this post right here, or that wall a little bit. Horizontal are the ones going left and right, and then diagonal are going this way. Vertical and horizontal, they're static, means they're unmoving. They don't really give much composition. But diagonal lines, they kind of make your eyes move around. So if you can get diagonal lines into your pictures, then it makes them a little bit more dynamic. Now, when you talk about lines, lines are everywhere. And we can see the lines here. We see a line like that line, that shadow line right there. There's a line of this tree that reaches up to the sky. There's a line of this building, these curved lines. So we can see all these different lines. And of course, this is kind of a diagonal line. Here's another diagonal line. But sometimes we don't see them. So, some lines are stated, like this one, the shadow going down the street, that's a stated line, meaning it's right there. Corners of buildings give you lines. The railing of a fence, like down here, street lights or telephone poles give you lines. So these things are stated lines, lines that you can actually see. But then there are lines that aren't stated. For instance, if we look at some lines here, this picture isn't great, but that flagpole be going straight up. It continues, right? It stops, but the line continues, gives it some dynamics. Look at these diagonal lines on this roof right here, and I kind of see that line. It kind of stretches down to the ground. It gives some dynamics to this picture. These other lines here in this picture, these are diagonal lines, and those give some dynamics to the picture. So there are other lines that you can have that you don't really, they're not real lines that you see, but your eyes will kind of focus on them. Like when a person is in a picture focusing in one direction, whoever's looking at that picture looks at the person's eyes, and then they kind of follow the eyes to where the person's looking. Person pointing in a direction, person walking, or a car is driving. So just some ideas about how there can be real lines and fake lines. So here's a little activity about lines. Go ahead and composition, take a look at that. More about composition using some contrast. So that's another way to show composition, to compose your photographs. So you can do a light subject against a dark background, or a dark subject against a light background. Both of these can make your subject stand out. Other contrasts are color. So you can photograph the subject in one color against the background of another color, right? So there's some things to think about. Like you would never want to take a picture of a person who wears a brown shirt standing in front of a brown building, unless the browns are completely different. So think about that when you take your pictures, especially like I think next week, like in week 4, you get into taking pictures of people. Okay, viewpoint. So you can pose with viewpoint. So this picture, obviously the person was up on a high rock taking a picture down. If they could have been down here at a lower level, and the viewpoint for this picture would have been completely different. The context and the composition would have been completely different. So low viewpoint is where you're looking up at your subject. That can have a dramatic effect and put the subject in a superior position. Like if I was going to take a picture of my son dunking a basketball, I'd probably get down on my knee away from the basket a little bit, and then I'd be looking up at him dunking the basketball. That would be much more interesting picture than if I was just standing to the side taking pictures of him dunking the basketball. Of course, normal view would be just at the level of your subject, and then high view would be taking a shot looking down. So this is kind of the high view over here. So think of different ways to take your pictures. Perspective is how far it appears you are from the subject. Also, it's called visual distance or the shot distance. And you can control this with the zoom settings on your camera. If you don't have lots of zoom settings or only like a 4x camera, then you can obviously walk in and out and, get closer to the subject or farther away from it. So long shot makes it look like you're farther away. Long shots include lots of background, and it really puts your subject in context so you know exactly what your subject is doing, but the background can also be cluttered. Medium shot makes it look like your normal distance from the subject, includes some of the background, and there'll be some context within the picture. Tight shot makes you look like you're very close, most of the background is gone, and you may not have much context in the picture, you may not know like where the picture is taken. And then obviously a tight shot, a real zoom in, you have no context. Now here's some examples. Let's just take a look. So here's a long shot. So let's take a shot along this fence line at the door of that building. And here's medium, or zoom in a little bit closer. Tight, a little bit closer, and you see we're losing our context, right? I mean, we can sort of tell that this is desert with the types of trees and things like that, but now when we get very tight, now we lose our context completely. We have no idea where this picture was taken. But that could be okay. But really, I think like the ideal picture right here, that gives a good picture of everything. So here's a little activity that they put in sometimes. So go through this, see if you can answer the questions. And then you have the unit exam. So this is just one quick overview and then the unit exam. Of course, the exam preview is right here for you. Now the photographic composition, the work for this one, you're going to apply the rule of thirds and take pictures of the day in your life. Now, I'll talk about this more, so I'm going to make a separate recording for this. So thanks for watching this recording of composition, and again, I'll do a separate recording for photo assignment 3.